How important do you think food security is today and in the next few years and decades?
Well, food security, that's a new word, by the way. Social, that's a new social context word, food security. Uh, Food is the most powerful weapon in the world, far surpasses the atomic bomb. Because unfortunately, we have not evolved to the point where we as human beings can do without it. There's a whole bunch of other things we can do. So, uh, if you want to feel secure and want to have a sense of self power, I suggest that everybody learn how to provide some of their own food.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into entrepreneurship and growing for a high yield?
Well, if I'll try to make it short, but yet bring everything in. We moved from Chicago in 1950 to California. I have an immigrant father, mother, myself, and my sister. After the war, World War II, my father wanted to get us out of Chicago and out to the West. And of course, at that time, there was no television, but I listened to the Cowboys on the Saturday radio. And also, my parents took me horseback riding in Chicago. I'm going to take one brief moment and close my door. Okay, hold on just a moment. Okay, I came back. My granddaughter just came home from school, and I told her. So, okay, and we moved to California. My parents bought a brand new home, and it had a quarter of an acre piece of property. And I was in seventh heaven. I was 10 years old, and it was mine to use as I wanted to. So I started growing food on it. I grew tomatoes and other vegetables, and I had so much fun out there. It was mine to use. They were very busy trying to survive our family. And I found out that I was growing more food than I found out people were very receptive to buying fresh food. I was 10, 11 years old. We also had plenty of orange groves nearby, so I asked the orange growers if I could have some of their oranges, buy some of their oranges. So I was providing people door-to-door delivery of fresh food back in the 1950s. Fast forward to, I went through high school. We moved to another piece of property, and I did not have room to grow at that. So I got involved in the food service business. I worked at a fast food restaurant called A&W Root Beer all through high school. So that gave me exposure to the restaurant business. Then I moved on to the University of California, and at the school that I chose to go to was at Riverside, University of California at Riverside, which was an agricultural station, research station for many years. It had just become a campus. So the emphasis there was agriculture. So I spent 4 years pursuing my degree, but in order to, I was paying my own way. I worked in the entomology department, which of course we know is the study of insects, which are very closely related to food production. So I spent most of my college years working out in the field for the university at various farms around California, taking care of their insect problems. Okay. Then I graduated. We had started a business with two professors in the area of biological control of insects, which is the natural control of insect problems in agriculture without the use of chemicals. We practiced what we call integrated control, where we used some chemicals very judiciously, but basically monitored insect populations by hand, thousands of acres walking through daily with machinery to capture populations, study them, and figure out what to do. I'm boring everybody, probably. So anyway, I had an opportunity to sell my share of the business. And I was in Coachella Valley, and I started to grow my own food. I ended up with about 300 acres of leased ground, and primarily growing, involved in the processing, or as we call the packing,
Oh,
shipping,
actually, Chuck,
and distribution.
I lost you for 1 second when you said that you sold your business and purchased a large acreage, and then I lost you. So if you could go
Okay,
back
I'm
to that.
sorry. Okay,
And you're not boring me
I
at all. You're super interesting what you've already shared.
I was able to find leased ground. I was a poor person. I couldn't buy land. I did purchase my own farm equipment, and I was able to farm without borrowed capital. So I grew slowly, but ended up with about 300 acres of leased land. I was very intrigued, which meant that we now had to take the crop from the field to the shed, package it, and ship it and sell it. So I got myself involved in those aspects of it with other people. And I also ended up with what we call local produce distribution. So I ended up in a matter of a year or so, we were the only produce wholesalers in Palm Springs. So all of those restaurants and everything bought their fresh produce from us. And I featured locally grown produce. That was we got more money actually than our competitors. And pretty soon we had no competitors because the restaurants wanted to feature fresh. The lettuce was in the field today, in the salad at the restaurant that night. Of course, potatoes weren't growing there, so I made arrangements with an old friend of mine. I had potatoes brought directly down from Idaho, very selected potatoes. Anyway, all of this, I was intrigued with the business side of the food industry.
Oh, I lost you
You
again.
actually, I'm sorry.
Says
Where did you
no,
lose
it's
me?
okay. It said you were intrigued with the business side of the food industry.
Business. Yes, the business side. So that stayed with me. Okay. I met a lovely lady. I married her. She was not too happy about the farm world. So, being a good husband, I sold and we moved to the Southern California coastal section. And I didn't do too much. I fished a lot for 1 year. And lo and behold, I ended up in the financial services industry. The bulk of my clientele were obviously agriculturally oriented and food service oriented because I understood their business. I didn't have to learn what it is they did. Therefore, I was able to provide them financial products that suited their business to help them on the success path. Okay. My marriage wasn't going well because I wanted children and my wife wasn't too keen on that. She wanted money. So I just said, heck with it. I left her all the money and I moved to Northern California with my adopted son. I did adopt her son. And he came with me, and now he's entering high school. And I bought a small 20-acre parcel in Northern California on a major highway, not a freeway, but a highway. And my dream there was to grow diverse vegetables and sell them directly to the local neighborhood and the local grocery store. And that's what we did. I met a lovely lady then who loved children. So we married and had a very expanded family. Plus, we raised other people's children and had a 20-acre truck farm, a produce store in front. We did produce our own eggs on site, and we also grew pork and lamb. The pork and lamb was butchered properly at a USDA butcher facility locally, not shipped away, and we were able to sell our product there right on our property. One of the things that I found a lot of fun was that I'm very cost conscious. a lot of my produce was pick your own. We also had a peach orchard, and we featured pick your own. In those days, we did not live in a very litigious society. Therefore, we didn't worry about Mary Smith hurting herself picking okra. Today, it might be more difficult to have a pick your own facility. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying it may be more difficult. And I want to caution your listeners that if you choose to do this with your local grown produce, to be sure you check with your attorney and insurance coverage that allowing people on your property to pick would be a covered expense. Okay. So, and by the way, liability insurance is necessary too. So basically, that has been my fascination all my life. We raised the family on the truck farm. That evolved into, as the children got older, and my wife's health was diminished, we evolved from that into the horse business. And we were in that very active until my wife's health condition, we made a decision to sell our property and move into an old folks neighborhood, which of course I did not have any room. I had a very small place with a modular home. Okay. Fast forward to today. My wife passed away last year. My youngest son asked me to move in with he and his family, and they live in Texas. And the new town that I came to, I found out the first day had a farmer's market. By the way, something that I was involved in starting about 50 years ago in our town in Northern California. Farmer's market is, to me, should be central business in any community, in any geographic area in the United States. And people should spend their time and energy supporting farmers markets rather than the local grocer, even though I love my local grocer. So I moved into town and I found this lovely organization that's only 3 years old. We have a city lot downtown that was purchased. It is a 501c3 charity corporation, tax deductible. We have a homegrown garden here. Water is provided, and of course, we have a community effort. We also put on many educational seminars throughout the year, and we have a farmers market 2 days a month, 2 Saturdays a month. And that farmers market, one of the requirements to be a vendor is you absolutely must be involved in the production of the food that you provide for sale. Interestingly, a lot of our vendors are not necessarily growing fresh produce. They buy it from other growers and they process it. We have people that feature salsa, pickled okra, beautiful pickles, eggs. So it's not just the fresh produce that you might think of, but in order to be a vendor, you must be involved in the process. You don't buy something. You have to take the local food and process it one step further. One of the ladies that I work with closely, she and her husband do raise pork, and she has pork sausage for sale there. She has pork products, ribs, and so on and so forth for sale at the farmer's market. So you're getting the real deal. And one of the things that I'm excited about is we read about the high cost of food. We read about the problems of food. I maintain in almost every geographical part of the United States, locally grown food is available. People do not need a large amount of space to grow food. I have a series of videos on YouTube where, as a business example, I wanted to show people how to write a business plan, which we did. And my proposition was, I'm going to plant 25 tomato plants. I'm going to yield 1,000 pounds, and I'm going to sell that crop for a net profit of at least $1,000. So what I did is I videotaped the whole year of growing, processing, and taking care of those 25 tomato plants to find out if it worked. And guess what? It did. We got over 1,000 pounds of marketable tomatoes off of 25 plants. Now, bear in mind, that is a very small space in almost anybody's yard. We not only had plenty of tomatoes for the family, we sold over $1,000 worth of tomatoes at $1 a pound. Okay, so I'm gonna give you an example. That those I wanted to use that as an example of what can be done. We don't need to have 20 acres. We all have an opportunity to raise a good percentage of our own food for not only ourselves, but for our neighbors. You can give it away. You can provide food for our local food banks if you so desire, or you can sell it and get some of your costs of the growing it back. So I probably just talked more than I have in a long time at any one time. I can shut
Why?
up now.
No, no, is just such an interesting and awesome story. Obviously, to learn from your life experiences, obviously the wisdom that you have uh, gained over the years is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation. And many things that you just mentioned that I would we could you know make a whole episode on a lot of the things that you already mentioned, right? But I love many things that you said. For example, that we have such a great opportunity to grow our own food, but also for our community and also for those that are in need. The example that you mentioned, the project of doing 25 tomato plants and in such a small space, and then growing over 100 pounds. Again, that's a great
1,000
example of.
Andre, 1,000 pounds of tomatoes from the
Yes, I said
25.
100, 1,000 pounds. Yes, that's a big difference, and that's a great example of how we could grow so much food in a small space. And of course, your whole life story is super interesting, and I think that it would really encourage people to growing their own food and um, getting into it for the right reasons. So I really appreciate it, and of course, any of the things that you mentioned that you want to elaborate as we go through the questions that I'm going to ask you, of course, feel free to do so because very informative, and really I think is going to help people get into farming for the right reasons. The people that do listen to this show. And the first question that I wanted to ask you was,
Andre, can I interrupt just a moment, please? I
of
have my
course,
wife's service dog. You know that I closed the bedroom door. My wife's service dog needs to go outside. If you allow me to just leave the camera for a moment, allow her to go
of
outside.
course,
Thank you.
yeah, take your time, no worries.
Okay, come on. Okay, my granddaughter will probably let her outdoors, but she's very well trained. And when the dog says she speaks very loudly. So I'm back.
Definitely. And as I mentioned, I mean, so many of the things that you said are just so interesting in your story. Growing up in the 1950s, being a young farmer and selling door to door as a 10, 11-year old. Those are things that have been lost in time, right? So it's exactly what I want to promote in this podcast is the fact that growing food should be something that people start doing from when they're young, and um, at least it's something that I'm going to teach my children when I do have the opportunity. So many things that you mentioned that I really resonated with, and of course I'm sorry about the passing of your wife. But again, it's like so many notes that I wrote down as you were explaining your journey, that I really appreciate definitely a awesome story. And it would actually sort of um, a good way to then go into the first question is when starting to grow your own food, lack of knowledge can be very painful. So, what advice do you give to homesteaders about effective land use and planning?
Well, one of the advantages today versus the 1940s and the 50s is we have this system that you and I are now utilizing called the internet. There's a vast volume of knowledge on YouTube alone. Just one example on how to grow turnips, beets, radishes, tomatoes, okra, whatever. I mean, there are just hours and hours of that. Also, if you have an interest in growing something locally in your yard, I would suggest finding, because almost every community has a truck farm or two, I would go out and introduce yourself to those people. Most of them are very open-minded and willing to share because they love what they do for a living. And one thing I mentioned is understand it was not a hobby, okay? It was what we did to survive. We were growing our own food to consume. In fact, we very seldom went to the quote grocery store because we also found out that our neighbors were willing to barter that which we didn't have for what it is they could offer to help us. So I know this sounds very archaic. It's not modern and up to date, but it works. You have to be willing to ask. If you're not asking questions, you're not growing. And I don't care what age you are. Asking questions is primary. But today, anyone who have the information on YouTube alone is, I don't think most people have the time to research it. To give you an example, that series of videos I have is 23 weeks. In fact, we did put that onto a CD back 20 years ago, 15 years ago. I sold thousands of those CDs for $14.95 all over the world. My biggest market, believe it or not, was not in the United States, but offshore. I sold more videos to Australia, New Zealand, Africa, India, and so on how to grow. The premise was growing tomatoes for health and wealth. That was the name of that's how you can find it on YouTube or under my name. Those videos are free to watch. Okay. But we did put it into a saleable package. Another great idea for a backyard grower who has a specialty, share that specialty with other people, either for free or there are people who are willing to pay. But you have to answer your question. That's what I would recommend. I was given the advantage back in the 40s during World War II. My father was overseas, my grandmother and grandfather, and we lived in a very immigrant neighborhood, Hungarian, Polish, Russian, Ukrainian, and Italian. All of my grandmother's generation knew how to grow things and knew how to kill chickens and so on. So I spent my toddler years at my grandmother's side in her garden. And being a precocious child, I asked questions and she was willing to share. So actually, when we moved to California, I did have a fairly good background, especially on root crops, parsnips, rutabagas, beets, and things of that nature. Tomatoes were not really that hot of a deal. So on the West Coast, in California, I was able to meet people who had knowledge of, I had a paper route also. So my paper route customers, I learned from them. because you get to meet your customers face to face. So again, asking questions. If somebody says today that I'm finding it difficult to learn how to X, they're not doing something right, because we know that that information is available, especially in growing.
Yes, I lost you for a second.
Oh
So
my gosh.
the last thing, no, the last thing that you said, and I completely agree, is that if someone is saying that they're finding it hard or difficult to learn any given topic, then they're doing something wrong. And that's completely true.
Yeah.
Because as you mentioned, if you're not asking questions, then you're not growing. So in reality, is how much do you really want it to learn that new subject? And if you are not learning it, it's because you're just not asking enough questions. You're not really putting in the effort into it. So thank you very much for that. And I love the name Growing Tomatoes for Health and Wealth. So anybody that's listening could, of course, look up your video series. So let me ask you, how can we overcome the difficulties around creating a sustainable food growing system that works year round?
Well, we have been growing food year round for many, many years, eons, if you want. The problem is we can't grow them all in our possible location. One of the advantages of California, I mean, not that I'm in love with California, is that the climate, the basic climate in California, we farmed three vegetables and produced vegetables 365 days of the year. Obviously, now I actually harvested tomatoes in Northern California where we snowed and froze. There's a tomato variety called the Stupice, Stupice, which is a dark tomato. I literally harvested tomatoes through Christmas in Northern California. I did have to take care of the plants a little differently, but they're a cold hardy plant. The plant was propagated in the Ukraine, in cold, the cold climates, the northern climates. So if you live in Minnesota, you can't grow summer crops very easily unless you go to the expense of creating an environment, an artificial environment. We know that as the greenhouse. The advantage today is with modern materials. I have seen online again, the computer, that you can purchase, if you do not want to make your own, greenhouses of a size that would allow you to probably grow most vegetables year round almost anywhere. And they're not, they're not cheap, they're not giveaway, but they're a heck of a lot less money than drinking Starbucks every day. Of course, you have to buy it all at once. The Starbucks you can buy a little bit at a time. But we have been shipping vegetables and air freighting vegetables all around the world for years. So the food is available to us. Whether or not we want to get it is something else. You and I both know that which you grow locally and you have, or your neighbor does, is probably going to be fresher and more nutritious than that which is grown commercially. For instance, I have broccoli right now that just headed out this morning. Okay. Right now, the heads are approximately the size of a $50 or larger. Those broccoli heads will never get to be as big and beautiful as that which you see in the supermarket. Because that broccoli, I used to grow broccoli commercially, is loaded and pumped with calcium and artificial fertilizers. Okay. When I grew my 1 acre of broccoli on our truck farm, I only used our own we produced our own fertilizer. I fertilized our broccoli was organic. We never had the big, beautiful head of broccoli, but we had a head of broccoli that tasted nothing like that which you buy in the store. The flavor and nutritional value far surpassed the pumped up broccoli. Okay. Same thing with your cauliflowers and so on, your other cold crops, your brassicaceae. Did you lose me? Did you lose me?
I did for a second.
Where did I
It's
go?
the last thing I heard you was that the organically grown broccoli, of course, is not as large in size as the commercially grown, but the flavor and nutritional value far exceeds that of the ones that you find in the store.
Right. And when you harvest broccoli, you grow in your garden. You cut typically there's the one head in the middle. You cut that, you're going to have smaller heads of broccoli continuing to grow. I literally would harvest a broccoli, I planted about an acre. I would go through that and harvest for 2 months in Northern California in December and January. I plant in August, harvest late November, January, December, and January. Okay. What I did for an interesting experiment is Steve Nettington had a market in Chico, California, and they used to buy some of my produce, and I took him my broccoli, his produce manager. And I said, here's a case of fresh broccoli. And he looked at it, and it wasn't pretty. Okay, it was not beautiful. He said, I don't know. I said, I'll tell you what, you give me a space next to your Salinas broccoli, nothing against Salinas, the broccoli growers making a living, okay? I said, you put it here, price it exactly the same as what your broccoli is, and just let me know what happens. Okay, so displays of broccoli. One looked very beautiful. Mine looked nice, but wasn't big, beautiful heads. They were small. He called me the next day and said, oh my gosh, a couple of our regular customers bought your broccoli, because he put a sign, local produced Orland broccoli. He put the sign there. Same price, no less. We weren't giving it away. And they went home and cooked it and came back and bought it and told their friends, and he was sold out before the day was over. And the other broccoli was sitting there. So again, this is the advantage of the farmer's market. Okay. This is what farmers markets do. And I don't know what to say. That's just the way I feel about it. If we have an opportunity to buy something that's grown locally, we are benefiting. And by the way, when you go to a farmer's market, that does not mean that you're going to pay substantially less. I can go to the local supermarket here in Mineral Wells, Texas, and buy squash for less money than I can at farmer's market. If you sit down and cook a batch of the grocery store squash, and you pick up this squash is squash, we're not big. Okay, I'm back. I had to let the dog in.
No worries. No,
Anyway,
and I completely agree with you. I mean, of course, it might be a little bit more costly to buy locally grown produce, but it's not only going to be fresher, it's going to taste better, and the nutritional value far exceeds store bought. So then
yes,
you're paying for the quality. So again, in my mind, is way worth it, right? So I think that anybody that is into this space of growing their own food, homesteading, permaculture, syntropic agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, they know that that is worth it. So I think that the right people get it, and if they don't and they rather buy the least expensive, then of course there's a trade-off there.
right.
Now you
The
go
the
ahead.
the interesting thing is the cost is not dramatically different. Again, I will use meat as an example. On the Facebook here in this new town of mine, A young couple opened a meat market that only features locally grown chicken, beef, and pork. Locally grown within a 50-mile radius. Locally grown and processed. I went in and bought some ribeyes, 4 ribeyes one day. Somebody commented on Facebook that they can't afford to shop there because the price is too high. Okay. I found out Walmart was $1 a pound less. And the difference was phenomenal. I have to excuse myself again. Okay.
Yeah, no
Somebody's at,
worries, no worries.
hold on.
How you grew your food organically, right? So one of the things that is key is of course the soil.
Yes.
So my question is, how can we improve soil health and learn about soil management?
Okay, I'm going to answer that. You come to a seminar that we had at our Let's Grow Crazy community garden last week, which is conducted by a couple who are members of our community garden. They're both she's a nutritionist and he's an agronomist. This is a young couple in their late 20s. Okay, my grandchildren's age. Phenomenal seminar. It was attended by 20, 30 people who live in the area who want to do backyard gardening. Okay, we're not talking commercial farmers. And number one, you can take and create an environment for good food if you're willing to take the time and energy. And again, it is not a cost burden position. We discussed vermiculture, how with simple plastic containers, someone living in an apartment can make soil, vermiculture. We also showed how you can make an outdoor compost pile. And next week, we're going to have a seminar on thermaculture, which is high intensity creation of soil. Okay. There's a big argument, I don't say argument, discussion going on, till, no till. I met a young couple here who have a 12-acre truck farm. They practice no till, but they also practice excellent soil management. We all know, and I'm not making a case plus or minus because I tilled, but I tilled judiciously. Okay. I mean, see, it's just like, I'm going to step back a moment. Remember I told you that we were in the pest control business, biological pest control business? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, we did consult with our clients and we recommended they spray. Okay. Very judiciously, in such a way that they are not offsetting the beneficial populations. In other words, you don't go in cloud spray. I'll give you an example in cotton. I had a 5,000-acre ranch in the Imperial Valley. We had 1,000 acres of cotton and 4,000 acres of alfalfa. And we rotated the crop fields. You know, it wasn't 1,000 acre, smaller fields, but they totaled that. And we checked the insect population in the cotton. If we saw an infestation, and they usually come because of the weather, the wind direction, or the alfalfa field was cut next door, which means the insects that don't bother the alfalfa but bother the cotton migrate out. So by counting the population in the cotton field, we might call an airplane in to spray 2 wingspans on the north side of the field, and then we would go out and reintroduce beneficials. Okay. And in other words, that's called management. Interesting, the man that owned that ranch, this would be 1966, we increased his cotton yield 1 bale per acre on 1,000 acres. That's a lot of cotton. and we cut his pest control costs by $40 an acre, increased his yield, and lowered his cost. What did it take? It took manpower. Now, we charged for this, but I'm telling you that his cost, that cost that we saved him, included what he paid us. So again, there are, and now today this is de rigueur. Integrated pest control, everybody's in integrated pest control. Most young people that go to college today are learning integrated pest control. Back in the day, we were pioneers. You know, we were almost shot in some places, heretics, you might say. But working for that chancellor allowed us to have a pretty substantial position. In fact, the business is still going today. The daughter of the founder is still running it, and she's, you know, we're not talking big business. Okay, we're talking a good business. But I don't know if I answered your question, because soil is something that we can manage. Again, we need to ask questions. I would believe that in every county in the United States, there are places that you can go and find a person who, he may charge you $50, $75 to come out and do a soil analysis for you, percolation tests, and so on. But there are so much information, as we did in our seminar. I mean, you know, that those seminars are available everywhere. And you can create your own environment. Does it happen overnight? No. Does success happen overnight in anything? No. When you put a seed in the ground, do you harvest the next day? No. I always used to talk about planting pistachio trees. You know, it takes 9 years to come to harvest. You got a lot of time and money involved until you harvest your first pistachio. You can plant other trees that will produce a crop sooner, correct? But we're talking, if you want to look at it, a business dollars and cents, it might be more beneficial to plant pistachios. Anyway, I'm probably getting off target. I'm sorry.
No, no, no need to apologize. That was a great answer, and I think you gave us aspects of both worlds: the business side, growing for profit, as well as it could be applied for a homestead, you know, family
Mhm.
size
But that's
production.
true too. You realize growing a homestead is a business. Life is a business. That's the philosophy that I bring. Managing your money is a business. So feeding your family is a business. So I mean,
I like that. I expand on it. I like that for sure.
it's well, I have I used anyway a couple. We had a community called that I Best Business Mindset Alliance. I had a talk show that went on for about 10 years, or call-in talk show. People from around the world would call in and we would discuss. And that was focused on creating the mindset. Okay. And it has a lot to do with self-improvement and so on. Now, and of course, then we can spend a lot of time. What is success? Success is not always in terms of large amounts. Success is accomplishing the task that you have set out on a daily basis, a weekly basis, and so on. If you want to produce food for your family, you draw up a business plan. You draw up a plan of action, a garden plan. You follow that plan. You also realize that you will not be instantly gratified. If you want to create soil, you cannot create it overnight. You can buy soil or you can create your soil. Everybody doesn't have the money to pull out all the soil they have now and replace it with something else. Some do. So again, it's the business mindset. I'm sorry.
Oh, I love that. That's why I asked you to expand on it, because it's exactly why I started this podcast and why I invited you to it, because I knew that your knowledge of business, entrepreneurship, and agriculture are so linked together, and you were going to bring so much knowledge and experience and so many things that you mentioned. I really enjoyed learning about. And for example, creating your own environment, creating your own soil, but everything takes time. So one of the things that I keep going back to, or a concept in this episode that I've done so far, is that we not only harvest um, we not only harvest fruit to eat while when we do agriculture, but we also harvest the fruit of patience, because it does take time to grow food, right? Just how you said, a seed doesn't you don't get the produce the next day. It takes a couple of months. So it's something that's been lost, and anybody could gain from it, right? I like in today's world, everyone is so impatient that if maybe people took up growing their own food, they would learn patience, they would harvest patience. So I really love that. And then how you said, what is success? Not always in terms of large amounts, but accomplishing the goals that you set to accomplish.
Yeah.
So the mindset is so important, because failure is not really a thing. As long as you keep trying, then you're learning something from it. And then technically, there is no failure, it's always success. So, yeah, no, I love it. And also, buying soil versus creating it. I mean, yeah, you could buy some soil, but it is very expensive. And if you want to do it in the long run, it's really not sustainable to buy your soil. But if you learn the different methods of improving your soil, as you mentioned, going to seminars, vermiculture, outdoor compost pile, the thermaculture, then you're going to save a lot of money and have knowledge that you could pass on to your children and your children's children. So I think you answered that question great. So I really appreciate all that knowledge. The next question that I have is, what tools can you share for selecting the right plants and animals for a farm or homestead?
Well, again, I have my personal prejudices. One of the greatest, and I learned this from my grandmother, a story, and I want you to close your eyes and picture South Chicago neighborhood in 1930s. Bungalow houses, okay? There was a garage. My grandparents never owned a car, never had a driver's license in their whole life. But my grandmother had a garage. And she says, "Oh my gosh, what a wonderful place to raise a pig." In Chicago on Avalon Street, off of 91st in South Chicago, which again is not a suburb, we're talking Burnside, South Chicago. My grandmother raised pigs. Why pigs? Pigs are a very efficient animal. They grow quickly and they produce meat very inexpensively. My grandmother had what we called a victory garden. Her backyard was all garden. None of that garden was ever wasted. So I'm going to go back. Pigs are a phenomenal small parcel animal to have. Number one, pigs are not dirty. People are dirty who don't manage pigs well. I don't want to go, I mean, I could talk about, we had 8 sows on our 20-acre farm. It made the mortgage payment. 8 sows. The progeny every year. I sold them as 100-pounders. I had a market, a Chinese market, a market of Chinese people. I had a gentleman that would butcher those 100-pounders. I got top dollar because I grew them the way they wanted them, the way the market wanted them. Lean, mean, okay? And that had to do with the food you gave them. My pigs were on concrete. I built a system with I can't show you, but just think of the wall of the barn. There was a big tub that would fill with water And when it filled, it would dump itself and it would wash the concrete that the pigs lived on. That water went out to behind the barn. I had a sump, a cistern that had pig water, manure water, which in turn was pumped into my irrigation system for the vegetables. Okay? You see the cycle? The cycle, okay? Those pigs were friendly, ate sow. My children worked with them. They had something to do. And the dollar amount that was created by those, oh, then we had food also. We didn't sell everything. We ate. Okay. Chickens are very popular today. Everybody's talking about chickens in the city. There are cities that have changed their rules that allow you chickens. Chickens are a wonderful source of two things, meat and eggs. Okay. Again, we're not talking hundreds of chickens. You know, a good hen will lay an egg a day. Okay. If you have 5 chickens, that's 5 eggs a day. I think that comes out to like 30 eggs a week. I think, if my math is correct. So, and when the hen gets a little old and she's not producing as well, my grandmother taught me very early in life, 4 or 5 years old, how to turn that chicken into Sunday's dinner. Okay, that's something anybody can do. My children grew up loving animals. They still do, all of my children. My children also knew that we ate the animals. Okay, so that again is a mindset. A mindset. They raised show pigs to go to the 4-H FFA, competition. That animal then was sold at auction for top dollar. Kids had enough money to pay for their own college education from their endeavors as young people. Okay. So again, all of this, you can get down to, gee, I grew those radishes. Should I eat them? It's my, why should I eat my radishes? My little pet, But I'm not trying to sound cruel. Okay. We have animals. God blessed us with animals to help us, and we help them and they help us. We're not, I'm very, you heard I talked about the service dog, okay?
No, I agree with you. I mean, we God did give us dominion
Yes.
over the animals. So as long as we do raise them right, I mean, they are for our nutrition as well, right? So I completely agree with you in that sense.
I might upset some audience. I don't know.
It's
It's
okay. It's okay. We can't please
but
everybody.
at the same time, everything is good in the, that goes back to diet. Grandma, everything is good to eat as long as it's in moderation. She made wine. We drank wine in moderation. We ate
Exactly.
potatoes, we ate eggs. I mean, all of these things. Anyway, but getting back to your question, if you have a little homestead, I recommend pigs over it. Now, the next thing would be lamb, sheep. Good meat, not as high, excuse me, not as high of a ratio of money in, money out, or food in, food out, because a pig will have 2.5 litters a year. A lot of people don't, you heard what I said. And an average litter of a well cared for pig is 8 piglets. So you have a chance of well raised, God in your favor, 20 progeny, 20 pigs a year per sow. If you raise them up to only 100 pounds, that's 1 ton of pork on the hoof, which butchers out to about 1,000 pounds, which goes far a ways to feed your family and 4 other families. Beef is the far end. However, beef takes a lot of room, a lot more feed, and your feed to meat ratio is not as good as it is with pig. I mean, again, I mean, these are based on my experiences. We raise beef also. Okay, lamb was good, and the other thing about lamb is, of course, lambs and pigs did go and they did forage in the fields after harvest. So you're recycling your vegetables, or you can pull up the food. I bought very little pig food. I grew a lot of our pig food because of our vegetables. You don't harvest every pumpkin. You don't harvest every watermelon. You don't sell every cantaloupe. You don't sell every Crenshaw melon. You don't sell every carrot. So again, that homestead can be there's a word for this. You know what it is? Self-sustaining.
Yes.
Recycling. uh, but again, as far as the small place, chicken, pig, lamb, a lot of people are adverse to pigs because they don't understand them. They don't understand. And pigs are extremely intelligent, bond very well. My son, whose home I'm living in now, he would lay down with a sow when she was farrowing, and I had no fear because he had already bonded with them. This sow is having babies, right? And it was my 5, 6 year old son who was in there helping her because she trusted him, and they had bonded. Pigs are the most intelligent animal in the barnyard is the pork.
Thank you for that, and I think it's obviously a matter of the location on the space that the
Yes.
person
Oh, yes.
has,
Yeah. Yeah.
and also their preferences. For a small place, you mentioned chickens are a great way to start. Do you recommend any specific breeds or types of chickens specifically?
We had Rhode Island Reds and Bar Rocks or the gray ones. I'm not a fowl person. I'm not a chicken person. That's not one of my specialties. We had great
Definitely,
chickens. Most of them were Rhode Island Reds and some of the gray stripe. I think it's Plymouth Bar Rock or something like that. But
definitely. Thank you.
again, for instance, a member of our community garden, she right now is in a national poultry show. Her poultry wins grand champion prizes. There are people in every town who are experts on chickens. Ask, ask and ye shall receive. What's best for
Yes,
your area. There may be some chickens that are better for Minnesota than they are in Florida. I don't know.
yes, sir. Goes back to what you mentioned earlier that if you want to learn something, just start asking the questions and looking for that community. Maybe you can't keep all the different livestock that you would like, maybe because of income, budget, or space, but someone around you can. So maybe you grow some certain crop, they grow that livestock, and then you could barter, as you mentioned. Is something that has been lost throughout the generations, but is such a key aspect of the human experience. All throughout history, it was a common thing for people to barter.
Sure.
Nowadays, it's almost non-existent, at least in, um, I guess, countries like the United States. Maybe in other countries where they have a harder time going to the grocery store, maybe in those countries there's a little bit more bartering, right? But even then, they are also dependent in the supply chain a lot how we are here. So I think one major aspect that we need to go back to is having that community mindset, bartering. And since I can't produce all the food myself, hey, what can my neighbor produce, and how could we benefit each other? So I think that is a great mindset that the younger generation needs to embrace and learn from previous generations. So I really appreciate that. Now,
One thing that I like to state, because you brought something in my mind, I'm very pleased to see, because I've basically been non-urban all my life. Even though I grew up in Chicago, Chicago was not urban in our neighborhood. Okay, it was country. But anyway, I see in observation that there are many larger urban areas that are setting aside places for community gardens. And that idea and concept is growing. Now, if you happen to live in a very urban area, large urban area, and you're interested in this stuff, become an advocate, become an organizer, become a person, gather yourself around with people who have the same thought process, and get a community garden growing. Now, the town that I'm living here in Texas is, 10,000. Our community garden was formed by a group of people. I'm new. Okay, I've just moved here. I'm a very active member of the community garden. But those people that got together had a common idea. They organized themselves. They organized themselves properly. They became a corporation. They are insured. They have liability coverage and everything else. They bought a piece of property very judiciously because being a corporation, the property owner had some advantages in the process, tax deductions, all the good stuff. And the community is benefiting by it. Okay. And you can do this anywhere. If there is not a community garden in your community, you can have one. If you live in an apartment building and can't have a garden, organize a community garden. It can be done. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not a success overnight. We're just growing now. The high school shop class just made us 15 more 4x8 by 3.5 foot high raised beds to add to the 25. You see, we're growing. Next year, we have budgeted and planned to have some more so that more people can share in the community garden. So
I
I don't know.
completely agree. Whether you're in an urban area or even in a suburban or even a small town, right?
Mhm.
3,000 people, even those towns have gone away from being connected to where their food source is.
Right.
But there is a lot of people that want to
Mhm.
start learning, and then maybe they use the excuse that they don't know where, right? So what you just mentioned is so key, because if there is no community garden, then you become that organizer, you
Mhm.
become that advocate, and then get that community garden started. And how you said, and it ties back to what we mentioned earlier, it won't happen overnight. It
No.
will not be a success tomorrow right away. But that's how everything in life is. Anything that is valuable takes effort and consistency. So what matters is that we start and give it a try. And if we keep going, it will work at some point and we will harvest. So I think if you want to, you could make it happen.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can.
Now, you touched a little bit on this on one of my previous questions, but I wanted you to go a little bit deeper on how can we circumvent challenges with pest control and wildlife interference without using harmful chemicals.
Well, I personally have never had a wildlife problem because I lived in areas where wildlife was not a problem. Okay. So I don't have much experience. Pest control is something totally different. Hold on just a moment. Yes. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay. On the pest control, I'm going to encourage anybody interested in integrated pest control, or what I would call proper pest control, is to read and ask questions. There are today, since 1960s, early 1960s, when after Rachel Carson, I'm going into history now. Most people aren't aware of it. There was a huge change in the thought process in the United States in the 60s on pest control. And that's how integrated pest control grew. Each area, again, is unique. Pest populations are different in Texas than they are in California, than they are in Minnesota. Okay. You have to learn your pest problems. And you do that by asking questions, reading, or going to the library, or go to YouTube, or ask Google, whoever Google is. I'm not a fan of AI, so I've been a big fan. Okay. Backyard gardeners can buy lacewing. They can buy ladybugs. They can buy trichogramma parasites, which is a small wasp, which we used to grow. In fact, when I was in college, I had a hard time having girls come to my house because I was growing insects in my house. We won't go into details on that. Anyway, the trichogramma wasp lays its egg in the cotton bollworm, the corn earworm, the tomato fruit worm egg. Little trichogramma minutum. Their egg hatches in the egg of the pest, eats that egg, becomes a larva and an adult, and goes and does it again. So if you have a preponderance of pest, you literally buy, and not enough natural trichogramma. You have to do insect, and we get into that. You can buy trichogramma parasites ready to hatch, mailed to you, that you would put out in your garden. The same thing with lacewing larvae. You introduce lacewing larvae, it's the lacewing larva that eats the pests, not the beautiful lacewing adult. She lays her egg on your plants. Her egg hatches, that larva goes to work and eats 80 to 100 aphids a day. Think about what I just said. Okay. Now, all of this is available. All of it is easily and readily available, and it is not, quote, expensive. You know, we've been able to buy ladybugs for ever, you know. So again, if you want to have a balanced, now remember, we don't want to, okay, I was just down at the community garden and in my raised beds, all right? There were beet army worms on my broccoli. I took my finger and killed every one of them, reached under the leaf and just did this. But this big, they're just little tiny things, a half inch, not even that. I didn't spray them, I killed them. Okay? Big deal. My hands aren't hurt. I'm not going to die. I'm not saying everybody wants to do that. I walked over, one of my neighbor's tomato plants had a tomato hornworm on it that was, what's wrong with my computer? Anyway, you know, it was that big. I just went over there, picked it off, and stomped on it. I didn't go get a spray can and spray. You know, so again, we can control our insects in our home garden. You have to have some bad insects to keep the good ones. That was the problem with the old pest control thing. When you went in and flat sprayed everything, you killed the beneficials. Who comes back first? The beneficials can't come back until the pests are there. And the beneficials are going to come back slowly. So we have to have some tomato fruit worms in our tomato plant in our garden. We have to have some aphids. do you see what I'm trying to say? I presented when I was doing speeches many years ago. There is an economic threshold that you have to look at. And if you understand the balance, you're always trying to get to that economic threshold. Sometimes you have to spray. Remember I said that? To turn it over and then come back. So I hope that answered. But as far as wildlife, I'm kind of not, you know, I've never had a deer problem or anything else as far as wildlife.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer. And now the next question is more on it could be more of a mindset response or maybe some productivity strategy that you might have, but it's around how can we avoid being overwhelmed when managing multiple projects at different stages in a homestead or farm.
You're going to hate this one. Okay. For some reason, in the last 40, 50 years, it's my observation that someone introduced a philosophy that we have to do a lot of things and multitask. Okay. And that is a pure disaster. I personally believe that too many of us have gotten into the habit of assuming too much responsibility. Okay. I'm going to step back a minute. The homestead. I understand what you mean by a homestead. Okay. There are only certain things that a person can do in a day. And there are certain things that have to be done every day for maintenance. I mean, there's some life maintenance things that have to be done, correct? Then there are projects that we take upon ourselves to improve our lot. I believe some people try to throw too many projects on at once. If you wanted to start growing food, you should sit down and decide, first of all, what would be the most favorite food you want to grow. Now, think about this. In the homestead philosophy, if you live in an area where other people are homesteading, typically that's true, you might want to grow tomatoes and become the tomato grower and let your neighbor become the potato grower instead of you being the potato, the tomato, the beet, and everybody else. That's thought, okay? But again, I have learned many, many, many years ago, it's a cinch by the inch, it's hard by the yard. And I typically, for the last 70 years, have no more than 2 tasks a day set aside the night before for my next day activity on top of maintenance, on top of things that have to be done to maintain the business, to maintain the farm, to maintain the livestock. You understand? But as far as the
Yes.
new projects, because the whole object of my life is to go to bed each night completely satisfied with the wonderful job I did today. Because then when I wake up the next day, I pat myself on the back and say, what a good boy I am. In fact, I shared on Facebook a blog post I made on my, and anyway, one of the problems we have today is people don't spend enough time learning how to love themselves. You can't give something you don't own. You can't give love unless you own it. You can't give your time unless you own some. Okay? So it's all predicated on us. So again, these are the things that help you to build that homestead. But don't try to this year build the garden, the horse corrals, plant the forest. I mean, I'm making things up. But try to simplify your life a little. Yes, there are projects that need to be done, but build your 1-year plan, your 2-year plan, your 3-year plan. Then we used to, one of my businesses in the financial services industry, we would rent a cabin in Lake Arrowhead every year at Christmas. And we would all sit down, 4 days. We would spend the first 2 days discussing the previous year. How did it go? And then we spent the next 2 days planning the next year. And one of the things that we emphasized is you have your long-term goal at the end of the year. I'm going to do X by December 31st next year. Then you sit down based on how you work this year. If you keep good records, you take that goal and you break it down into increments. So for instance, in this case, you need to meet new people. If you need to meet 50 new people, you only have to meet one new person a week. Meeting one new person a week is very easy. Meeting 50 people is not. I mean, I'm simplifying this, but I think you understand what I'm saying. Same thing happens in gardening, raising animals, and building a homestead. I think we can break things down into small increments and don't become overwhelmed with trying to do too much. Because on top of it all, we do have to have our maintenance day. There's so many things in our lives that must be done every day just to survive, just to, you know, homeostasis or whatever the word is, to have a level playing field. So anyway, I hope that answered it, or maybe not.
It did completely answered it, and every question just confirms that it was such a great idea to invite you to be a guest, because just the wisdom that you have already shared. I have still a couple more questions, so don't think that I'm gonna let you go already. But every answer that
I'm
you
smelling my dinner, Andre. I'm in the bedroom, but I'm smelling my dinner.
but every answer, you've not only answered practical wisdom that could be applied to the actual business or growing food wise, but also mindset and just so many vast knowledge that again I really appreciate you taking the time. And the next question, you sort of touched on it on the previous one, but hey, let's see how you can elaborate on it. And is, when having the goal of growing for high yield, how do you plan, design, and install projects and infrastructure?
Well, infrastructure is a good word because you're typically talking soil, irrigation, things of that nature. Okay. You have to have good soil to grow high yield. You have to have water delivery system to have high yield. I mean, we didn't get into drip ear systems, I mean, all of these other things, because because water, if you watch my video, you will find I used to only irrigate my tomatoes every 10 days. That'll just shock the whole world, I'm sure. But I didn't want to grow tomato plants. I wanted to grow tomatoes. So I stressed my tomato plants to set fruit because God says they need to reproduce. And the tomato plant says, oh my gosh, I'm not feeling good. I better make sure I set my progeny. And then as soon as it's set, boom, I pump the good stuff back to it to grow another blush. So we have layer upon layer upon layer of tomatoes, enough tomato growing. So having an infrastructure system that manages your water delivery, having the soil is important. High yield then becomes the result of your management. And again, growing tomatoes is like growing cotton. Any of the melons and tomatoes grow the same. I grew melons the same way. You actually set melons, correct? You have a bloom of flowers. You want them to set melons, so you want to make sure that you're not constantly feeding them while they're doing that, because they're going to just grow more vine, you see? They're going to grow more plant. So again, all of this information is available by so many university studies and so on, or personal experience, okay? I can't tell you what day to water. I have to look at the plant, you understand? There's no book. You have to learn. You're going to make mistakes. You might starve a tomato plant. It might fold on you. Okay, that next time you know better. Big deal. The world's not coming to an end. Start out with quality seed or quality transplants. I prefer to grow my own transplants, starting out with quality seed. And one of the things that we're blessed with in the United States is we do have some seed companies that are typically family owned and have been around for several generations. I'm not going to name names because it's not relevant. They're all around the place. Start out with quality. The odds are your quality is going to come out. I bought some seeds online I was in a hurry. I just moved to Texas. I needed to plant melons. Okay. I ordered off of a regular source. I ordered Crenshaw seeds, and I guarantee you that those seeds did not produce Crenshaw. I mean, Crenshaw. My plants came up to be hermaphrodite, cassava Crenshaw, and who knows what else melons. Not one seed generated a true Crenshaw plant. Okay. So again, that's my experience. I had a disaster. I bought a cheap tomato plant. I didn't grow my own tomato plant. I didn't know Texas. I planted them too late. I had a disaster tomato. I have a beautiful tomato crop coming now for next month because I'm learning Texas, you see. And I had control over that tomato plant. So start out with quality. Your infrastructure, yes, you have to plan ahead. If you want to know how you should water in your area, you should ask people who have been watering in your area. If you want to know what kind of soil you should have, you should ask people who know what soil you have in your area. And I'm learning, in fact, at our seminars at Let's Grow Crazy, our community garden group, we do have people. There are things that grow very, very well in a very small geographic area that don't work 50 miles away. Okay? I mean, that's based on history, see? So again, we have to do our studying and get to know your neighbors, get to know that community garden group. If you don't have one, organize one. So I hope I answered that question somewhat.
Oh, yes, definitely. Thank you very much. And I really like this. Start with quality, because if we start with quality, then we could expect that the result will most likely be better.
That's correct. Not
So,
always guaranteed.
not always, of course, guaranteed, but at least we're giving ourselves a higher chance
Right.
of better qualities if we start with good quality. Um, Now, one thing that you've mentioned many times throughout this call is when you were younger, all the different experiences that you gain with both animals and growing food. And it's something that, at least with my father, he would tell me, or he tells me, he was born in 1951
Mm-hmm.
in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm originally from Colombia, but I
Yes.
moved to the United States already a while ago when I was younger. But he tells me that back then, his family, they had cows, they had gardens,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a common thing for that generation to grow up around that environment, that their family had at least some livestock and grew some food. Maybe not all the food that they ate, but at least some of it, right? It was a
Yes.
common thing. And at least my opinion is that that was probably the last generation, people born in the 50s,
Right.
that their parents knew about it, about growing food, about keeping livestock, and then they at least showed it to their children. But after that generation, it sort of started to go away, and now it's almost non-existent. Only very few people still do it and teach it to their children, right? So then my question is, why do you think that basic knowledge and skills needed to grow your own food and keep your own livestock has been lost over time?
Well, there's a couple of factors, and I'm not going to get political in it too much, okay? Um, Mankind is easily swayed and controlled. And one of the things that people have learned hundreds of years ago is if I feed you well, I can control you well as long as you know I'm the person feeding you. Think about raising children. Anyway, so What happened in the Western world, in the modern world, is we had the Industrial Revolution, which created things that made life, quote, easier. And as our life became easier, we found out we were kind of told that it's a lot easier to live in the city and work in the factory than it is to toil and sweat in the field. Okay, that's what you were told. That's what you were inundated with through via newspapers. And then we had the radio, and then we had television. Okay? Just think of the newscast today when they talk about the, I mean, I don't want to really get it, the farm worker, the poor oppressed farm worker. I was a poor oppressed farm worker. The ladies that harvested radishes with me in 1964 were making $6.50 an hour because I still have their pay records. And they were happy as hell because they had more money than their neighbors did. And they didn't have to work too many hours a day. Do you follow what I'm saying? They did not think that they were toiling and laboring in the field under adverse conditions when they came out at 6 o'clock in the morning and we harvested radishes on our knees as we crawled down the fields harvesting and tying radishes. Okay? It's a mindset. So what you have are literally millions of people who have been indoctrinated to think a certain way. If you told, if again, the guy that comes up to you and says, I'm leaving this place, I'm leaving suburbia, and I'm going off into the hinterland to homestead, everybody thinks they're crazy. How can you give up all of this for that? Okay? Is any of this what we've talked about easy? No. It isn't all fun in games. That's why I like gardening. I really promote gardening because you can do it and still have your nice air-conditioned house and all of these other things, So I think what happened is we as a population have allowed ourselves to be indoctrinated by a small group of people who love control. And that's basically what it is. And that's enough of my political statement, but that's the way I believe, okay? I've been a contrarian all of my life. My own father, who never finished school, I put myself through college. I graduated college. I have a college degree. What did I end up doing? Farming. My dad shaking his head, the poor immigrant guy. He says, oh my gosh, son, you could be doctor, lawyer, Indian chief. And you're out here on the tractor because I had him come out and when I planted my first 10 acres of radishes. And so he couldn't understand. How could I be so dumb? You see? Because in Hungary, we were farmers. Okay, so anyway, that's enough. I could wax hours on this subject, so we're not going to do that. We're here to
I completely agree with you, and that's why I do throw in this question because I think the same way. Of course, to not get too into it, right? Because then it could get very controversial.
Oh yeah,
but the reality is that I agree 100% with you. I think it has been deliberately done over generations, obviously, because it can't be done over a year or two, right? It takes time to change the mindset of the population so that the people think that they are making the choice themselves when in reality it was programmed and indoctrinated in them through the educational system or through the media, entertainment, all education, everything. So I agree with you, and I appreciate your honesty on that. I think we're on the same page with that.
How many times do we use the word the poor farmer, the poor field worker? What's interesting? If you take a group, and I've done this, and I'm doing it now at the community, you take a group of third graders and put them out at the community garden, they go crazy, man. They love it. They don't want to go back to class when you show them. Okay. So enough of that.
Oh no,
We're gonna.
I've had that experience because I don't have children myself, but I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and whenever I start seeds with them, put them on seed trays, they love it. It's to them it is a fun activity to do.
Right.
And then when they see a couple weeks later that the seeds are sprouting and they're
Sprouting.
growing, the excitement is just incredible to them. Like even today, I saw a papaya seedling that I sprouted with my niece that lives in Orlando, and I was gonna send a picture to my sister. So I'm actually gonna do it right after this because
Good.
I want to send it to my sister. Look, this the papaya plant that my niece helped me germinate. So yeah, children love it. It's part of our nature, and not only do they have fun, but it's such a learning tool in so many ways that then they could take for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
So even in that sense, it makes sense why they took it away from us, right?
Mm.
Because there's so many benefits to it, and they don't want people to have that knowledge, have that freedom, and
It
also
also gives you
enjoy it.
power, Andre. The ability to grow, process your own puts you in power.
Exactly.
If you have to come to me for a bowl of soup, I'm in power. Anyway, enough.
Exactly. And it's like you mentioned earlier that your grandmother, she did the victory garden. Is that was a common thing before, and now is almost non-existent or like a hobby.
Yeah.
But it actually goes into my next question because a lot of the people that like growing food now or getting into homesteading or maybe some of these concepts like permaculture or syntropic agroforestry or regenerative agriculture, not always, but a lot of the times, the motivation is more of a hobby or because they enjoy doing it. But how I see the future is that's going to actually become more of a demand or a must. So my question to you is, how important do you think food security is today and in the next few years and decades?
Well, food security, that's a new word, by the way. Social, that's a new social context word, food security. Um, Food is the most powerful weapon in the world, far surpasses the atomic bomb. Because unfortunately, we have not evolved to the point where we, as human beings, can do without it. There's a whole bunch of other things we can do. So, uh, if you want to feel secure and want to have a sense of self power, I suggest that everybody learn how to provide some of their own food. And I maintain that in most places in the see, everybody does not live in New York or Los Angeles. Okay. There's a huge population in this country that live as I do in a little town in Texas of 10,000 people spread out. Okay. I live on a city lot. I could grow enough food on my son's city lot, front and backyard, to feed this family and three or four on either side. Fresh food. Okay. And the neighbor could have the chickens and the other neighbor could have the pigs, and, down the line. Okay. We don't need acreage to do this. So I think we as people should have some semblance of knowledge of food production. Not that we have to do it, but it would be nice to know you can. And besides that, there is a tremendous satisfaction, as you have mentioned, and there's actually studies. I had a blog post years ago. I wish it's gone, but the studies that showed what a human's well-being is provided for by gardening is amazing. The endorphins and the different hormones in your system that are out there, just your hands in dirt is good for you. And we all know this, but we don't talk about it enough. So, it's food security. Yes, it's very important. There's no reason in this country for anybody to be without food. There's no reason. It is not a money factor. It is not a dollar factor. And we can go on another program on that. So
Mhm.
anyway,
No,
anyway,
I love every one of your answers, to be honest. And I had just one last question because I don't want to take too much of your time, and I've already taken a lot of your time, so I
dinner is
appreciate it.
ready.
But the last question is, if you had to start from zero with your agro business, what's the best piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
Uh, okay, stay with it. Don't quit. Don't allow a wife to talk you out of it. No, in other words, obviously, I would have learned more. I would have asked more questions. I would have tried to become more knowledgeable about things. I am also a type of person who is not afraid to experiment because that's my scientific, experiment. I try this versus that. I would plant on a 1 acre parcel. I would try to cultivate differently. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? 4 rows, I'm going to treat this way. 4 rows, I'm going to treat that way. 4 rows. It's experimentation. Try an idea. If you think it might work, try it. Don't be afraid to try it, because you'll never find out what happens unless you do. So that's what I would do. Keep
I
trying.
love it.
Keep trying.
Well, I hope that one day I could visit over there in Texas in
That's it.
person, get to know you, and actually meet the community garden, because it just
Right.
sounds like it would be awesome. So I actually wrote it down. I really hope that I can.
I'm gonna make a big push here. Okay. This is
I would love
advertising.
to.
All right. I have
I would.
mentioned Let's Grow Crazy. LET''S grow crazy .org. There's a website, letsgrowcrazy.org, O-R-G. I'm going to make this big push because we are having our annual fall fundraiser. We are a nonprofit corporation. We rely on grants and donations to provide the land and the services that we provide to the community, okay? Our fall fundraiser, right now, there are only 300 tickets printed. I won't tell you how many are sold as of today. It ends on November 16th, and the tax-deductible $50 donation, a winner, will receive round-trip airfare tickets for 2 anywhere Southwest airline flies, any destination, the Caribbean, Hawaii, New York, wherever Southwest flies. That is our major fundraiser for the year. We're raising $15,000, right? 300 times 50. If we don't sell 300 tickets, we're still going to have the drawing, but there will be no more than 300 tickets sold. I would encourage your friends to go to letsgrowcrazy.org, open your heart, and help a community garden. None of our staff is paid. None of our officers are paid on payroll or anything else. We run the farmers market twice a month. We maintain the land and provide the community garden for the people in the community. So that's my big sales pitch for the day.
Oh, I'm gonna make sure to go into the website and add at the end of the video a screenshot of it,
Well, I
and also add
appreciate
the
that.
links
Thank you.
so that anybody, also in the school community, I'll add it in the announcements, because we need to help each other and help local community
Right.
gardens.
And in turn, I want to hear about others also, because that's how we become a larger community, is by helping other communities.
Exactly. No,
And
I
this
completely
is
agree.
especially good for anybody who likes to fly somewhere, because 1 out of 300 is pretty good chance.
It is. It is. So I again, as I'm gonna post that in the end of the video and at the beginning probably, so that
Thank
Let's
you.
Grow Crazy.org is there. Anybody that can and wants to help. Other than that, do you want to provide anywhere that people could contact you or
Well,
follow your journey?
I have a website that unfortunately I'm not maintaining as much as I used to because I'm helping a lot of other people. I got involved with authors, okay, and I'm consulting authors on how to build their business. See, authors didn't think they owned a business. Yes, you do. Okay, so my website is chuckbartok.com. Very simple. You might want to read some of my posts on self-improvement, business growth, and so on. There are some agricultural analogies in there because growing a garden is like growing a business and so on. And of course, on YouTube, if you look up Chuck Bartok, you can find the 23-week video series, Growing Tomatoes for Health and Wealth, along with some other videos. I have 200 some videos up there. So.
Awesome. I will also post that, and I like the growing a garden is like growing a business. So, again, Chuck, I really appreciate your time. And finally, I just want to invite everyone watching to join our Grow Food Homestead community on school.com, where we help rural and urban homesteaders with small to large acreage to grow and raise the food they eat through completing planning, designing, and installing homesteading projects. Again, Chuck, I really appreciate your time, and I hope to have you back here sometime in the future.
Thank you very much, Andre. I appreciated it. Have a great week.